Hi everyone, I'm here with Mark Oppermann, who's the co-founder and director of Webio, which is a conversational AI and messaging company. Welcome, Mark. It's great to chat with you. Thanks very
Thanks,
much for
Chris.
joining us.
Not a problem at all.
So I suppose we were chatting a little bit before around what the impact's been on COVID, and so what have you seen from a COVID pandemic point of view with your business and your clients really?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. A lot of our clients are, let's say, B2C. So they would have a lot of consumers. Primarily, we focus in on credit collections and payments. So really, the whole range of credit, the whole range of collections, and then obviously payments as well. And one of the biggest things that we've seen was at the start of the pandemic, it took a week or two for the whole ramifications to kick in. And then obviously there was all talk about payment breaks, payment holidays, rescheduling, all those type of things that actually really challenged a lot of our customers about how they were going to do this. Mm-hmm. And actually, one of the biggest takeaways that I've seen has been the whole growth in automation. You talk about all these things of what's possible and what have you. As a technology business, you're always trying to, I'm going to say, educate people to say this is what you can do, and most times people nod their heads and go, "Gosh, here we go. Here's the sales pitch again." And sometimes that is the case, but actually, I think what a lot of people found that they actually were in a position where they needed to contact all their customer base almost immediately, needed to do quite a complex interaction with them in a conversation. And to be frank, the only way was going to be automation. And that has been, I have to say, a huge success. Clients reporting back to me that 70% engagement on that sort of let's call it chatbot on the back of an SMS conversation. So if there was one takeaway that for me stands out more than anything else was the level of automation that people, I'm going to say, were forced into, but actually they were forced into it, and now they're sort of going, "Gosh, this is actually quite good." So it's a strange turnaround in many regards.
So I remember sort of day one in the pandemic. I mean, we were all sort of like everyone was trying to get off site and those kind of things, and there was definitely conversations around would telephone conversations continue, right? So would outbound dialer kind of continue? And I don't know if that. Did you see much of that in terms of like using your technology to replace outbound, like face-to-face kind of speech-to-speech conversation?
Yeah. And I'll give you an example. One of our customers, and it was only on a webinar there quite recently that we had two of our clients on, and one of them was talking. Oplo is the brand. They were talking about reaching out to their customers and doing it by phone. And the conversation that was needed on the phone typically was taking about 20 minutes. But what they could do is they could nearly do the same via messaging and automated. And the whole thing could have been completed in about 2 minutes. So from a resource point of view, that was possible. Also, what we've seen is that most of the newer technologies, they're all sort of cloud-based, and more people are looking at that whole cloud versus on-premise. And I think that had been, again, that's going to be an accelerant that people will realize actually more times than not. It's not in every instance, but cloud does mean, and I'm speaking from experience on our own technology, that actually remote working is a lot easier. So rather than having one instance and everybody connected directly, that we've had instances where 300-400 agents are in their kitchens, and away they go from there. One of the other interesting things, just a quick point on that, voice is it's a very resource intensive, and And it was a case of where what they've noticed as well is that the quality of the conversations were as good because it was digital, textual based, going back and forth. The dog barking in the background, music going on. The the agents, it didn't actually worry. So it was one of the these side effects that people go, oh gosh, that's really good. So it was one of those things you don't plan for, but you realize, gosh, that's an interesting side effect. So that was just one small aside.
So you raised an interesting point around cloud. So I mean, so cloud's been sort of like building for a long time, and we've always been talking about, software as a service, and like the cloud was a big thing a while ago. I mean, do you think this is? I know it's been building over time, but do you think this has been a turning point in terms of getting more people on the cloud? And it's because it's been a necessity, like being able to stand up things quickly. I mean, there's been a real differentiator, I thought, between like people who are ready for it, but people who weren't, and that's been a bit of a differentiator in terms of the speed of getting services back up and running. I mean, do you think it's been a moment for cloud-based services with the pandemic?
Absolutely. Let me tell you, from talking with different clients and knowing the technologies that support their businesses, it is a case of where I've seen firsthand the people with the cloud-based or mostly cloud-based systems that they were extremely adept at changing. And also, it's not so much that most systems, oh yeah, you can dial in from home, and they've tested it, and they've tested 10 people dialing in from home. They haven't tested 300 agents dialing in from home, where cloud can naturally do that a lot better, and it's easier. So absolutely, I've seen people adapt in a couple of days versus some other clients that it actually did take a number of weeks. But it's funny, cloud, an overnight success after how many years? 6, 7, 10 years. It was called, what was it? It was hosted, it was this, it was that, and now it's just rebranded and it's cloud, and it's sexy. So, it has been there for a long time, but absolutely, I think more and more people would be looking at that to say, taking the learnings that we've had over the past 7, 8 months, I think that is going to feature in a lot more decision making in the future.
So we talked a bit about cloud, and how the pandemic has sort of changed the people's adoption of it. What about customer contact? I mean, so I think all of us through the pandemic, we've all been forced to use digital channels. We've all been forced to use mobiles. We've all been forced to interact in a different way. Have you seen any of that in terms of like adoption of new technology? And what do you think was going to happen in the future?
The genie's out of the bottle. Absolutely. Let me give you an example. Again, I mentioned a recent webinar. One of our clients, Snap Finance. They had Jonathan Booker was giving us the details there of pre-COVID. They were 60% dialer, 40% field agents. They've flipped that completely on their head. It's 60% digital messaging, 20% dialer, 20% field agents.
Right.
And it's a case of where you're not going back to the way it was, because they're engaging with more people. Their digital messaging, the feedback is that it's a 3x when it comes to engagement versus the dialer, and it can do so much more. So I genuinely believe the genie's out of the bottle. And if you look even like, WhatsApp, it's something like about 15 to 20% increase on traffic over the past, and that's just one channel. Every single channel, everybody is sort of using their mobile more and more. The average mobile usage in 2019 was I think it was a little over 3 hours 10 minutes, and that had been gone up from about 2 hours 40 the previous year. So I could imagine 2020 it's just going to go up through the roof.
We were laughing just before we started here about the sheer number of channels you've got to have. So there's SMS, there's WhatsApp, there's Messenger. I've got to look at my emails today. Every day I've got to look at Slack. I've got to look at Teams. It's like we're just got this proliferation of stuff. There's a million ways of getting hold of each other. What you've seen with that, and how do you think that will change? Because the same is true for customers as well. I mean, there's a million ways of getting hold of people now.
Yeah, there is, and that's going to be the challenge for companies, because the whole conversational messaging is here. It's here to stay. It's the quickest growing channel for a lot of the businesses that we engage with, and actually proving to be, I'm going to say, the most effective, and also the most efficient. But you're absolutely right. There is a proliferation of so many channels. Quite frankly, it's hard to keep track of. Now, I would say sometimes there's a lot of different channels that aren't suitable for business. And there's also a lot of channels out there that aren't open for business as well. So there isn't an open API, so you can't really connect from a business perspective. So, you know, the ones that really today are sort of quite big would be, and I'm talking about the growth ones, would be the likes of WhatsApp is huge. That's our quickest growing channel by far. And if you look at that, and I always, when I talk about this, I restate the same numbers, and people sometimes, it takes a while to sink in. There's 1.7 billion users on WhatsApp at the moment, sending a little over 70 billion messages a day. That's over 40 messages per person per day, just in one channel. So people are spending a huge amount of time just in that channel alone. And there is sort of a bit of a disconnect between that channel and business today. But with WhatsApp Business, that is now really, as I say, addressing that. And we're seeing huge growth in that area. The other ones that I think that we'll see a lot of growth in would be the likes of RCS. That's the sort of the Android operating system, and then Apple Business Chat. And you could nearly sort of lump the two of them together. They're sort of the, if you were to design SMS today, that's what it would look like. So it is the next version of SMS. They're going to be native on most phones already. So it's just a matter of the networks rolling them out. So, but just a quick one on that. If you look at other areas and the future, it's already here, Chris. It's already here, but it just happens to be in China. So if you look at WeChat in China, it's ubiquitous. It does everything for everybody, from their currency to QR codes for paying stuff, dating apps, booking flights. It does everything. Even any new business, if they're not on WeChat, there's no real sort of potential for their success. So that's where I think a lot of these say Western platforms are looking enviously at WeChat, saying that's what we want to be. The likes of Facebook and all these people, they're wanting to see their platforms do all of these things, and you know, that will be taking a lot more of our, being involved in a lot more of our lives in the future.
So if you just say, like, here are the top 5 channels that people have got to think about, you know, telephone's going down, but like these are the top 5 channels we've got to think about. What would you say they are? So it's like SMS, then you know, WhatsApp. I mean, what are the top 5?
Okay, I'm going to actually start with one that you probably wouldn't think I would start with, but I would have to say telephone. That's still the predominant channel for most people out there. So me saying, oh, don't worry about it. So today, telephone is probably still the biggest chunk of that. Then I'm going to talk about primarily, let's talk about, say, the UK and Irish markets. That would be SMS. And again, that's purely driven by SMS in the UK is about a third the price of what it would be in mainland Europe. Then you have WhatsApp. Then the likes of Viber, Messenger, RCS, and Apple Business Chat. And those last two, RCS and Apple Business Chat, I think they're going to move very much into competing with WhatsApp. And that probably we're going to see that happen during 2021, when there's just a lot more adoption, and there's still a little bit of, should we say, sorting out of the regulations around RCS. There's different versions of it, and until the manufacturers come together, there's one uniform. It's standard for everybody. The minute that happens, it's going to take off like a rocket.
Yeah. So the message is, don't forget about your telephony center yet. That's still super important. But you've got these other channels that are coming in, and you've got to get ready for it, right? So
listen, I'd be silly. Much that look, our business is all about the messaging, but from a market point of view, neglecting the biggest chunk that people do today would be silly. Now, what I'm saying is that you do need to the over predominance that a lot of people in the collections and payments world have on the phone is incorrect. It's about getting the balance right, because actually there's huge benefits by blending those activities together, both your phone and that whole conversational messaging. There's a lot to be gained from there.
And so one of the benefits we chatted about, particularly with messaging, is getting hold of people who might not have picked up the phone, and getting it into new demographics. So so that seems like that's a big benefit, getting new contacts and getting hold of people and really helping people earlier. But do you think the demographics has changed as a result of lockdown? Do you think it's going to change, that becomes more prevalent?
Do you know what? Everybody always assumes that older people don't text or WhatsApp and what have you. That's not the case. And my 84-year-old mother WhatsApps me all the time. Some funny jokes, some important information. So the idea of old people don't use technology, that's a myth. Now, what I would say is that when you look at, and I'll use my mother as an example, somebody older, and I'm going to say older with 50 plus, they'll have a lot more comfort using the telephone as a means of communication. They didn't grow up in the digital, they're not a digital native. But if you look at somebody, say 35 or even 40 and below, I've been in situations where I'll just pick up the phone and give them a quick call. I don't know about that and what have you. And 25-year-olds where they're very sensible. They come across as very clever people, but actually it's just nearly a reluctance that I'm not used to the phone as much as, say, somebody else. So that is why you're seeing such an acceleration in the whole digital messaging, sort of, mobile adoption. So it's not so much older people don't use it, but they will be as comfortable and probably more comfortable on the phone. So I never like to write off say, 50 and above or 60 and above, forget about them. You actually will still engage. Just on that whole engagement thing, what we've seen, and again, this goes back to the channel thing. And look, it is a challenge for businesses. The more channels that you open up and let your customers engage with you on, the more engagement you will get. But it's about managing all those channels. That's where the real pain, let's say, comes in, to say, how do you have all these channels working side by side, and how are they all feeding into the business in a coordinated manner? That's the challenge.
Well, it's been great through lockdown, just around demographics in terms of how we've all become much more digital savvy. I mean, all of the memes and the jokes that have come through on the rich text messaging and those kind of things. It's been hilarious, isn't it? So, and I think some of that stuff will translate into the contact environment as well, essentially. Just talk a little bit about chatbots. I want to talk a bit about chatbots. So with chatbots, you've got, that's you got this two-way. SMS was always sort of one way for the longest time. You've got this two-way interaction going on, and that could sort of lead into things like chatbots. Where do you think we sit with the evolution of chatbots and sort of the adoption of chatbots, particularly in collections, but more generally as well?
Okay, well, let's start with more generally to start with. I think, as ever, new technology like this that has the potential to be, revolutionary and transformational in so many aspects of our lives and the way that we engage with any business, invariably they're overhyped. invariably it's under-delivered, and it starts with a big fanfare. It's all a bit disappointing, and then gradually it builds up to be, gosh, it's the norm. And I think we're on that cycle of getting. We've gone through the disappointments, and we're going back on the curve to get there. Now, there's a number of things I would say there is that there's still a long way to go for the emotional AI responses to be able to be generated to ensure that actually that let's call it the chatbot is able to have and automate a full conversation end to end, and in particular in the collections world where there is so many softer skills that is needed from the agent, rather than it's just a transactional type thing. So transactional things are and if you were to look at a say a collections conversation, there are some super easy parts to automate. The ID and V, balance, all these type of things, and sort of the chatbot can do all that, and really, and there is a difference between a chatbot and automation. So automation would be where you can automate stuff like, a date of birth, a postcode, and there's no real clever technology, and sometimes people make it look superb, but it's quite basic. Sort of the chatbot would be where people are starting to put unstructured sentences, sending them into a business, and the objective of the technology, chatbot, AI, whatever you want to call it, is to understand what that person meant by what they said. And actually, if you were to say, you need to ask so you give a little slip of paper to 40 people, and you go, you need to ask a particular question of the person in the corner, and they all go over and take a turn. Everybody from their walk of life, from their age, from their life experiences, they're all going to ask the question differently. So, things get asked in lots of different ways, and people say a lot of different things. And that really is where, automation and AI and chatbots, it's about having that ability to understand what somebody wants. Because the minute you understand what they actually want, it's very easy then to say, actually, what they're looking for is a balance. They want to pay. Oh, they need this piece of information. So to understand what they want is key, so that actually what the best next step is. And the better you do that, the greater the customer experience, and also the greater the capability of the chatbot. So there is a long way to go, but I'd have to say there are some great use case examples at the moment. I'll give you one example. One of our clients, sort of very large online retail, and within 3 months on the financial services side, they went from zero automation to 40% of their conversations was being managed, I'm going to say, by automation. It's a blend of automation. It's a blend of the chatbot, the two bits coming together. But 40% didn't involve the agent. Now, it got handed over to the agent after the ID and V, after the postcode, and one or two other things it was handling as well. But that got built up. So, that's actually a sensible number. 40% of your conversations being managed that there's no agent involvement. So that was a good win for them.
So it seems like this sort of like blend of sort of chatbots, human interaction, seems like it's kind of the way to go. I mean, I love the idea of, chatbots and using sort of like text or, like textual type tools to be able to interact with people, particularly from an evidencing point of view. So you can, and people like to read those things. You can read fast and you can explain it. If you go into the T's and C's, it's easier to read it than hear it on the phone. And you sort of like that sort of like blend between that, albeit with some soft skills, which you get through the human interactions, which is what we all do, right? So seems like the way to kind of go, really.
Yeah, it's funny actually, because what you see is that when you engage, or when somebody engages with a business, and there's this big debate, do you respond to say, hi, I'm so and so chatbot, or do you just respond to say, hi, I'm Mark, or is it Mark, the chatbot of the company? and there's a big debate to say which one do you go for. And the sort of, it's nearly sort of, God, why did we go to all this trouble? When you actually put up Mark, hi, I'm Mark, the chatbot to help, the virtual assistant to help you, you will find people's responses are a lot more structured than when you don't say.
That's interesting.
But actually, the quality of conversation is better on the other side. Versus when you say, "Hi, I'm the virtual assistant." So it's gosh, it's a win one side and it's a win the other. It's trying to get that in the middle is the magic place.
Just think back to when you were a kid, right? And did you have those computer programs where you used to go in and use to, like, the very early sort of like AI back on your old sort of VIC-20 or Commodore or Spectrum it would be, and like it was going back. You think about where we've come to since then. I mean, just like how much difference it was, right?
But even I pick up my phone, I think it's 2 or 3 years old. But even the power in this thing, gosh, how many of those computers would you? So it's incredible how far we've come along, and there's a lot more road to travel as well, I would say.
What about investments? Are you seeing a change in the investment cycle over the last sort of like 6 months? I mean, certainly, pre-COVID, I mean, particularly collections, always been a tough environment to get investment funds for. And then we sort of went through this sort of like COVID crash almost, and it was like, well, definitely those investments to really help us get out of a bit of a difficult situation, and technology definitely helped. And so investment sort of came a little bit easier. I'm kind of interested just to hear a little bit around what's happening now. What are you seeing now? Is back to normal coming back, or is there still investment, or do you think the whole thing will sort of carry on and change?
Yeah, there's definitely more of there's more conversations happening now about investment. No two ways about it. And I think it's actually on the back of some of the things I've mentioned earlier. I think a lot of there has been recognition that automation, that we actually need to do things different, because sometimes it does take such a cataclysmic event like the pandemic to really shake things up and get people out of their comfort zone. And I think that is where, so I think if I was to take the first, and I'm going to break it up, say over the last 8 months, I'm going to break it up in 2 parts. The first 4 months were the firefighting. It went from, oh my God, and we're getting the business back, and they're operating maybe at a lower level because they're not out taking payments and what have you. And really over the past 4 months, it's that, getting used to change and getting back into sort of the adoption of, and definitely I've seen more people are now both willing emotionally and mentally to engage with this, but also the amount of projects is definitely more evident now. So I think there is, and it's slowly people are getting to the understanding that actually, as the government help incentives schemes, as they start to peter out, it will be a case of where, and I think it's going to be next year before there is that, and it's being called that tsunami of debt. And actually, people are getting to grips with that to say, look, we know how badly we were affected previously by the change. How are we going to be fit for 2021? So definitely I've seen a lot more willingness, and people sometimes you could be giving away tenors for a fiver, and somebody goes, too busy. Where now actually they're saying, no, tell me, I'm actually wanting to know about this now. So I think there's been a complete sea change there.
Well, it's interesting. It's going to be a really interesting journey the next few years. I do think it's almost like all the chips have been thrown up and they're going to land in a different way. So I think we're seeing some really big changes. I think and I think it's interesting from a technical point of view, particularly a technology point of view, in terms of like definitely seeing as an enabler. So.
Yeah, no, I'd absolutely agree. And you know what? That will be as well. There will be a lot of, and I think we haven't seen it yet, but I think the landscape out there, from retail to collections to, I think it's going to affect every business. There will be a lot of amalgamations, there will be, I don't know, mergers, there will be lots of, so, 2-3 years down the road, I think the marketplace that we all operate in will be fundamentally different.
Well, Mark, thank you very much. Fascinating as ever. It's always good to chat with you. So thanks very much, and really great insight. So really appreciated making the time.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Hope we talk again soon. Bye-bye.
Okay, speak to you soon. See you. Bye.